tripod hysteresis, tripod settlement, horizontal centering error, vertical centering error, control point settlement, control point disturbance, slow and inconsistent setups. Today, we're going to solve every single one of those problems by installing a permanent survey concrete control pillar, essentially the gold standard when it comes to control point demarcation. Ask any surveyor what their biggest pain point is when working on a large, long-term, and fast-paced construction project or monitoring scheme, and chances are whatever their issue is, it can be traced back to an unreliable primary control network. Whether the symptom is accuracy issues, not enough time to as-built or lay out what the client is demanding, or check shots from previous work not landing where they should, they can usually be mitigated by not having to deal with poorly set control points. I've been on my fair share of long-term construction projects over the years, the kind where you have multiple survey crews on the site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I've seen the good and I've seen the bad. And what did every well-managed project from a survey standpoint have in common? Reliable and well-established control points that were realized through control pillars. They cost a few $100s and a couple hours to install, but as that project stretches on, they usually pay for themselves 10 times over. I'm going to show you how I install them, and maybe the next big project that comes your way, you'll decide to try it out yourself, and if you do, I'm willing to bet you'll be thankful you did. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a concrete expert, and there's a bunch of different ways to build a pillar monument. This is the way I've been doing it for years, and it's worked for me. And this is 100% the manual, roll up your sleeves and get dirty way of doing it. If you have access to a concrete truck and an excavator or backhoe, this becomes much easier, but for argument's sake, let's say you don't. The same principles will apply either way. First, we need to figure out where we want our pillars. Ideally, they should not only be intervisible now, but for the duration of the project, so it sure doesn't hurt giving the construction plans a good review before deciding their best location. I use plastic form tube footers as my base because they're easy and they're cheap. Use the footer as a stencil and paint up the hole that needs to be dug and get to work. If you've done any boundary work in your day, you're probably used to digging holes at this point, but if there's an excavator on site already, I usually try to schmooze the operator into helping me out here. I'm installing this pillar in an area with a 24-inch frost line, which essentially means the ground won't typically freeze deeper than that. This is important because we don't want the ground under the foot of the pillar to freeze and cause heaving, which could change its position, so I made sure this hole was at least 30 inches deep. I then placed the footer inside of the hole and added 3 rebar in the center for a bit of structural insurance. This probably isn't necessary, but rebar is cheap, and it's not hard cutting a few lengths to size and hammering them in. And in the name of science, I wanted to test a revolutionary method of hammering rebar into the ground. It's relatively simple, but I've heard it's extremely effective and increases efficiency. It basically consists of holding the rebar with your hand, and instead of hitting the top of the rebar, you smash your wrist with a 3-pound sledgehammer, as this provides a larger target for the hammer to contact.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
As you can tell from the expression on my face, the evidence, albeit from a single sample size, points towards this being a less than optimal method, so I went back to the tried and true procedure, all in the name of science. And after I had 3 rebar in, it was time to cut the cardboard form tube to length. If you have access to a miter saw, you can get a fairly straight cut by spinning the tube against the rear fence as you engage the blade. And while I'm at my saw, I ripped a template out of 1/4-inch plywood that's slightly larger than the 10-inch form tube I'm using. Then I drilled a 5/8-inch hole that is used to secure the column plate to the template via a nut on the other side. After the concrete is poured, I'll use this to hold the column plate at the correct depth, partially submerged into the concrete. Back at the dig site, I placed the form tube onto the footer and temporarily secured it in place with a few screws. Throughout the entire process from here on out, I'm keeping an eye on the plumbness of the form. It doesn't need to be 100% perfect, but you certainly want to be close. We are now ready to backfill the hole. As I add dirt, I'm regularly checking my level to make sure I'm not veering out of plumb and compacting the dirt as I go. Once everything is backfilled, it's time to start mixing concrete if you don't have a concrete truck coming by. In a perfect world, you dig your holes, place your forms and backfill and have a truck swing by to pour all of your pillars at once. And since we're talking about a relatively small volume of concrete here, I've often got away with talking the site into using up their leftovers after a regularly scheduled pour if the timing works out. Now, if that's not the case, such as was the situation here, you'll want access to a power source, water source, and a cheap concrete mixer should do you. A generator should cover you on the power front, and if you're on site before there are any water lines in place, you can always use a portable water tank and a pump. There are a ton of options here in terms of how to get concrete in the forms. I believe I used about 14 60-pound bags, and it took me about 45 minutes to an hour to mix the concrete and fill the form. It really wasn't too bad at all doing it manually. If you're the one pouring the concrete, it doesn't hurt to tap the walls of the form as you fill it to reduce any air pockets that start to form. After the form is full, we're ready to set the concrete column plate into the form. Shout out to Seiko for supplying the aluminum column plate in this video. I was very pleased with the quality when it showed up, and it gets 2 thumbs up for me. For anyone interested in it, reach out to your local Seiko reseller and let them know you're after part number 2072-52. I didn't have a 5/8 inch nut kicking around, so I secured the plate to the 1/4 inch plywood using a Leica spigot adapter. And then it's just a matter of sinking it into the concrete and tapping the form walls to remove any voids in the concrete that we just created. And finally, we'll give it a last check with a level, and this would be the time to shim that plywood template up to get your column plate a bit closer to level if desired. We're going to be using a tri-brack on this, so it's not critically important that it's perfectly flat, but it sure doesn't hurt to be close. I let the concrete set for a few days, then stripped off the form tube by peeling it away using some channel locks. The finish of this post didn't turn out quite as nice as I was hoping. Perhaps my mixture was too wet. Combining that with the fact that temperatures dropped to freezing a couple days after the pour sure didn't help. But that shouldn't really affect the usability of this pillar one bit. This isn't structural, and I fully expect this pillar to outlast me. And that's it, we're done. All in, after the concrete, the form tube, the footing, the pillar plate, and the rebar, my cost was around $250 per pillar, plus the time it takes me to set one, which in this case was about 2 to 3 hours working alone. Now, installing these on-site does introduce a quantifiable expense, and obviously I don't use these on every job. But when we factor in the time saved from being able to walk up to a pillar and either set up my total station, base station, or prism in a few seconds, and more importantly, knowing that this control point hasn't moved, or at least has moved to a much lesser extent than nearly any alternative monumentation that I would have used, well, that's just money in the bank every single time I use it. And it doesn't take long at all for these to start paying themselves off. They're not only great for total stations and prisms, but I love using these for my base station as well, which is actually the exact reason I built this one. There's rarely a day that goes by that I'm not running some kind of testing for my channel that involves a base station. It's ridiculously convenient to get home from my day job, slap on a base station, and know it's set up horizontally and vertically within a millimeter or so every time, and I'm not messing around with a tripod or hoping my monument in the ground hasn't moved. Not to mention up here, we're dealing with freezing and thawing ground 4 to 5 months a year. Anyone that's surveyed up north knows what a nightmare this can be when running a total station. It's a constant battle trying to get your measurements in and continually resetting your backsite before your tripod feet settle and your accuracy goes down the tubes. This essentially completely removes that issue. And while we're at it, let's hit those error sources one more time. Tripod hysteresis, or the small repeatable shift in the instrument's position or orientation that occurs when the tripod head or legs flex and then spring back differently after being loaded or rotated, introducing angular error in the measurement. Well, no tripod equals no tripod hysteresis. These pillars aren't moving under the force of a robot. Tripod settlement. Well, this pillar weighs over 1,000 pounds and the base has a relatively massive surface area compared to a tripod. Now, it might settle initially after installation, and it is a good idea to let some amount of time pass before using the pillar, but after that, this thing shouldn't move to any significant degree we're going to be able to detect with our instruments. Horizontal and vertical centering error. Well, we're using force centering, so the horizontal aspect is out, and vertically I can now use much more precise measurement techniques to reliably measure my HI or HT to sub-millimeter accuracy. Control point settlement and disturbance. We all know haul truck drivers and heavy machine operators love to seek and destroy our control points. This is just a fact. On this one job, I'll never forget coming back to set up my instrument on a key control monument only to see a 4-foot tall pile of concrete dumped directly on my staked control monument. In fact, the stakes and flagging were still sticking out of the top. I wasn't even mad at that one. They won that round fair and square. But all this to say, it's much harder to run over a 1,000-pound concrete pillar. It's obviously not impossible, but at least you'll probably do a little damage to their equipment too. And at the end of the day, that's what really matters. There's a reason these are used for EDM baselines and chorus stations, where the highest level of accuracy is required. We're talking about true forced centering here that provides phenomenal positional accuracy that typically lasts the duration of an extended construction project and beyond. Likewise, if you have a long-term monitoring contract, a pair of these pillars can make all the difference in the world. Well, that wraps up this video. If anyone has some tips or advice on how you set your control pillars, feel free to leave them in the comments below.